Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Go team for sticking out this long in the conference. Well done, you. Thank you so much for having me, bringing the supposed planner in, but I'll let you in on a little secret. I'm not actually a planner. But I have been around planners now for 7 years, so I have absorbed a fair bit. And again, little secret between us, I'm actually an accountant. My brief here was to share knowledge from the Planning Institute's perspective on how we engage with decision makers. Being the CEO, it's important you need to understand what CEO stands for. It actually stands for the credit of effort of others. And to that end, I will attempt to just explain a little bit, using someone else's material, what planning is all about, if I know how to get the video to play. Can someone do that for me?
Ever wonder how a community kind of just happens? Because it's a bit of a small miracle. The places we live in are like theaters where hundreds, thousands, and sometimes millions of people are simultaneously living, eating, buying, selling, making, working, romancing, moving, building. It's amazing the whole thing doesn't all fall apart. But have you ever thought about what's going on behind the scenes? Before I go any further, I am not talking about event planning here. This has nothing to do with weddings. Planning is the process through which governments, businesses, and citizens come together to shape their communities. It's so important, there's an entire profession dedicated to it. Planners. Like the communities they work in, the planning profession is complex and diverse. Some planners work on issues like housing, working to provide safe and affordable places to live in. Other planners work in transportation, improving networks of roads, trails, bus routes, sidewalks, and bike lanes to help everyone get around. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Planners are also involved in architecture, protecting heritage, promoting energy efficiency, celebrating arts and culture, protecting the environment, and protecting places from flooding because climate change. The list goes on and on and on. And whether they work in government, the private sector, or non-profits, planners are tasked with finding solutions to those issues. They conduct research, consult with professionals, they analyze, try to predict the future, and in the process, they write reports, give presentations, talk to the community, create models, and make maps. They make lots and lots of maps. And when that all comes together, planners, well, they plan. They create policies and bylaws that help guide communities towards the future. Gosh, it's so beautiful. But good planning isn't just a document. It's a process, one that consults and collaborates with people. It's key that planners recognize change and work with their communities to plan for it rather than being overwhelmed by it. But above it all, planning is an attitude, one that firmly believes that when people work together, they can make a difference. And that's planning in a nutshell. Or at least what we can say about this profession in a minute or two. It can seem like organized chaos at times, but that's the hard work that goes on behind the scenes to make sure that our communities are places that are enjoyable and worthwhile to live in. If you'd like to learn more about planning and the profession, check out the Licensed Professional Planners Association of Nova Scotia at their website, lpans.ca.
So,
ever wonder how a community kind of just happened?
They were able to tell that story much more succinctly and much funnier than I ever could. But you'll note I did steal it from the Canadians. IAP2 and PIA really are joined at the hip. In fact, I'm sure there's a number of the people in the room who are planners and knew all about that. But the two organisations, you'll hear from Marion and I probably over the next year as we try and further embed the two professions, because it is my strong view that we must and do and must continue to act in synchronicity. We have a symbiotic relationship. Working closely is strategically important for both the professions and the professional bodies. Up on the screen you can see the diversity of planning. There's a whole wagon wheel of it there, and one I put a little loop around is the community side of it. But as you saw in the video, the role of planners is diverse. They're employed in a number of sectors, both private and public, and they work in two areas which we call statutory and strategic. And we've got members in all those quadrants. It's a broad church. Often their views are diametrically opposed, and I suspect you might have that in your organisation's membership too at times. So what's the context that we operate in? This is called the line of sight, and this is the context for planning. There's a few gaps, a bit of a disconnect at the moment, but it operates right from the global agreements, and I saw our chair wearing a SDG badge, and that's one of the international agreements that Australia has signed, and that should cascade all the way down to the local area plans and the site plans. There's a little bit of a disconnect, as I said, at the moment, because the federal government, even because they have no constitutional role, have actually stepped back, and there is a vacuum there at the moment. But at each layer, the planning at that layer informs the layer below, but the principle is that you push the planning down to the lowest level that can effectively engage with its community. And it is the community and the elected officials who are the voices that we engage with all the time. But in the end, these are the decision makers. They are the politicians at local, state and, at times, federal level. They're the ones making the decision about policy and the application of those policies, and that's the world the planners live in. Notwithstanding that the federal government doesn't have a direct role in planning, they've got many policy levers which actually impact on the settlement patterns of Australia. Immigration, taxation, infrastructure spending, all those things affect where people want and can and do live. But the federal government is what we call spatially blind. We're having discussions with them about that. So what's our role, the Planning Institute's role, in influencing these decisions? Well, it's tricky. Whose perspective are we thinking about? At its core, we could often think about just the organisation. But no, we're about the members, so that's the perspective we should be looking through. No, on many occasions, we're actually thinking about the broader planning profession, because our membership probably, we don't know the numbers, it's probably around 20% of the profession. But no, really, we're here to represent the community's interest. It is complicated, and we are an amazing organisation that can actually oscillate through those concentric rings, and we can do it in one sentence. It's the challenge for the profession in when they are engaging with the decision makers, and the thing I have to keep reminding us of is which perspective for this issue are we really considering? And it is tricky. So, advocacy. It's a word that means different things to different people, but this is how PIA has traditionally done it, and to be fair, continues to do it, because we're in the process of learning new ways. So we meet with ministers, we lodge submissions, we media releases, we write long, very earnest letters, and then we go and tell the members how busy we've been. That's kind of how it works. The other game we play is whack-a-mole. Now, for those who have a little more grey hair in the audience, they'll know what whack-a-mole is. But this has tactically been one of the things on how we do our advocacy. We watch the media, and as a story pops up, we grab the hammer on the whack-a-mole and we go bang. And the next story pops up the next day, bang. And of course the moles pop up quicker and quicker until eventually you can't knock them all down. And that's very much how it feels when you're in that reactive world of responding to every issue as it jumps up. And that's how we've been doing it. planners actually are pretty lousy at campaign advocacy. What I mean by campaign advocacy is the ability to take long-range campaigns to get one really important policy change. Planners see the complexity in things. That's why they're lousy at it. They understand. Their world is that they sit in the middle of all these agendas and they try and work out the best compromise to get that outcome for the community. And this means that they see everything as a complex problem. And of course, as we know, every complex problem has a simple solution, but generally it's wrong. One thing planners can't do, and I've asked them many times on some of our bigger issues, is give me a 3-word slogan. Not on your Nelly. Not a chance. They just don't think that way. So now it's my problem. So how are we going to do our advocacy campaigning now? And we've actually started on this. So let me just take you through 2 quick case studies. And I might say I'm keeping this fairly high level. We'll get into the detail when we get in those nice comfy chairs and you can really grill us about the detail. But one campaign we have is to create market demand for our highest membership category called Registered Planner. It's a membership category where you have to have qualifications, experience and prove your competency through an examination process to your peers. Now remembering that planning is a non-regulated profession. To build those numbers, I've decided I'm not going to get involved in what they call supply marketing. I'm not going to go to every planner and say, oh, would you please become a registered planner? I promise you'll feel good about it. It doesn't pass the what's in it for me test. We have to create the market demand for that qualification. So it's all about working with employers and procurers of planning services, but also it's about working with governments, primarily at the state level, and getting them to accept and adopt the competency standards, even if they are unwilling, and they are often unwilling and unable to say you must be a registered planner, but they do find the concept of the stated competency standards very useful. The other campaign we're working on at the moment is a call for a national settlement strategy. In fact, this one was only launched last week at Parliament House. The concept of a national settlement strategy, it's a shocking term, isn't it? Sounds awful. It sounds like you are going to live over there, you over there. It's not about that, but we can't think of a better phrase. The moment you wouldn't mention the word population. But what we're trying to do is to gather bipartisan support for a concept of a national settlement strategy. That's a conversation where we do think about, do we want 3 Tokyos or do we want 23 really vibrant small cities? They're both valid, but who's having the conversation of what we want? So this document we've gone into an advocacy campaign with, and that document, let me tell you, is 80% why we need a national settlement strategy, only 20% what it is, and that's very deliberate. In the advocacy world, and I'm preaching to the converted here, there's a journey of discovery. Some of the people we talk to at the very beginning, some, like some in this room, will get it straight away and they want to go straight to the what is it? How do we do it? But to get the social licence for the politicians to show the leadership here, we have to get people through the why we need it. It's not a new idea. We have been banging on about this for 30 years. I had 7 immediate past presidents in the room when we launched this, and each one of them had been through a phase of trying to get this up. But we're at a tipping point. The community is cranky with congestion. The community's cranky what they are seeing as their living standards dropping. So the window's opened. Hence we call it the tipping point. Just quickly, a bit of an overview. Again, this is probably familiar to you. This is Mark Moore's diagram of influencing decision makers. Now, I used to see advocacy as a technique which is very similar to low volume, high value sales. It's a very similar concept. You're selling a value proposition. But this is much nicer, because the moment I mention sales, it turns most people off. This is a much nicer way of presenting it. Just quickly, the big one is articulating the public value. We so easily go to describe the products or the services or what we're trying to get the politicians or the decision makers, the bureaucrats to sign up to. But in their mind, they need to understand the public value. Legitimacy and support. Identify your targets through influence and power. Only work with those that are in that top quadrant. But you've got to know who's who in the zoo. Really importantly, you've got to know that the organisation has the operational capacity to pursue the campaign. I call it the pain to gain ratio. This is a three-legged stool. Like many analogies of that, you've got to have those three legs working and consistent in strength and form, otherwise you are going to dent your pride. So what are we doing at the moment? We've got national policy positions and we're only limiting it to a small number. They inform our states, because all planning is state-based, as you know. And we look for major planning system reforms, minor tweaks and machinery of government. But this is where the bulk of the work is done for PIA at the state level. So our tactics, we have 2 national campaigns, and then we mobilise when windows of opportunity open. We cannot create a public conversation with our little voice. We have to wait for a window to open. Housing affordability was one recently, and then we could get involved. But we could not start that conversation on our own. And we will continue to play whack-a-mole, but we'll play it as a pivot play. So you hit the mole on the issue they're talking about and you pivot that to the discussion you really want to have. Key messages. Here, this is the only bit you need to worry about. My suggestion, be really clear at the outset on the purpose. A lot of the time, you aren't actually looking to influence policy decisions. It's actually a membership recruitment and retention strategy. Realise what that purpose is, and if you're committing to the influence, that's fine. Be clear on the public value. It's really hard to do. Talk to the views of the people who matter. It's probably not something I should say in this room, but it's harder than it sounds. And make sure the internal stakeholders all understand that pain to gain ratio, because these are long-term, multi-year campaigns, and you've got to be up for it and you've got to understand the size of the prize and how it's going to help. Get it right and you can make a difference to the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. So yes, I'm an academic, but I'm going to present to you ideas on the basis of 2 things. One, research with government ministers about their views on public input. So it's very much practitioner-based research. And 2, some further insights that came out of the workshop elective I held on Tuesday, which some of you may have attended. And there were some important points there, which led me to sort of adjust what I was going to present today. So I have 2 top tips. We were asked to provide 2 or 3 top tips. And the first one is to market public participation to the decision makers in terms of what's in it for them. And the second thing is to design public participation to suit them, given their political reality. So those are the 2 core points, and I'll just go over each in turn. So first one, in terms of marketing participation to the decision makers. My research, as I say, interviewed experienced government ministers who, after years of being in government and being involved in trying to achieve policy change and their goals as political leaders, told me about the range of benefits they saw to high-quality IAP2 type public participation. But one of the things that came up in the workshop elective when I presented this on Tuesday was the comment that not all politicians think this way. And of course that's true. I only talked to a sample, but also those who were very experienced and had learned through experience why it was valuable. And the comment was made that, not only did not all politicians know that, maybe also new politicians don't do that, and they get elected and want to just forge their way through without engaging, and they don't realise why it's beneficial. So what I'm going to do is just go through some of the points that you might make when making the case to decision makers that actually also come from the politicians I interviewed themselves, from the very experienced ones. And the first point is that it actually saves the decision makers money and avoids crisis, because if you engage properly in advance, then you end up reducing conflict and opposition. If you don't engage properly and you don't get to understand people's views, then those views will surface, but in a very unconstructive way, maybe towards the end, and they can end up derailing all the political strategy. And that's a big loss, that's a big cost. So public engagement, even though it can seem expensive, actually will save both financial resources and political capital for politicians in the long run. And then the second key thing is that really high quality public participation can help politicians in a range of ways. So the first one is that it can identify a range of potential options for them. And that's really useful to a politician if it helps them, draw out the nuances, draw out a range of possibilities for them to consider, if it gives them options rather than tying into a box, which is what a lot fear it will. The second thing is it can help to generate consensus by getting different voices together and getting people listening and talking to each other. It can also help generate a feeling of ownership from the public in terms of the final decision. So something that politicians talked about was, you can lead and you can create legislation, but if the community don't have a sense of ownership of those decisions and ownership of the policies and programs that you propose, it won't work on the ground, and it won't actually succeed after the politician has left, because the time in which politicians are in power is actually quite short, even if it's very intense to them. The other thing is that it can develop support for the final decision, so people will more likely to back it and comply, even if they don't agree with everything that has been decided. But if they feel they've been engaged and listened to and considered and things have been adapted somewhat, they will then go and back the politician and back the political choices that they make. Also, it can help identify politically doable ways forward through very difficult circumstances. So they said rather than raising controversy, it can help politicians deal with controversy and show a way through by getting people engaged and reflecting and deliberating in all the ways that you do. And most importantly, it can create policy that works on the ground and that lasts. So whilst we all like to think that politicians are selfish people who don't care and they're just looking to maximise their own self-interest, actually the vast majority get into power to make a difference. They want to leave a legacy. They want to achieve positive policy change. They have social issues that they care about. That's the motivation of the majority of politicians, even though we don't see that in the media. The media don't report on that, but this is behind the scenes. And the thing with engagement is it can actually help them achieve longer-lasting change that will remain in place long after they leave office. And so it can appeal to their heart. Believe it or not, politicians do, they're human beings too, and they have a heart, and they very much go into politics to make a difference, and engagement can help them with that. And those are not just ideals or theories, they're the things that the politicians themselves, these government ministers in the UK, US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand told me. So it's very valid and valuable words to actually play back to them and to other politicians when making the case. The second side of it is about designing public engagement to suit them. Now, the reality is that politicians, whether we like it or not, have to deal with complexity, with competing demands, with political factors, with the media, with the need to win election, because we live in democracy, and that's a good thing. And so they also have to show leadership as well, and sometimes take difficult decisions that aren't popular. So that's their role, and we need to consider that when designing public engagement. And the ministers told me some things about what works best, and also the other broader research and talking to practitioners and reading the literature also told me a number of things. And the first thing is to involve them. So the most influential and effective cases of public participation which have influenced the decision makers have been when the politicians are connected to it in some way and when they're championing it. And this is a point made by quite a few people during the few days. Now, it doesn't mean you let them run the process. That's not what I'm saying, but you involve them. Second thing is to ask them what they'd really like input on. And particularly at the beginning of somebody's time in power in government, that's when they have ideas about, well, they want to reform the tax system or the welfare system, or they want to deal with the housing crisis. And they may have some idea of the direction they want to go in, but there'll still be lots of details they want input into. And that's, if you ask them that, and then you create engagement and focus it on that, they're much more likely then to want the results and to want to get involved and to listen to them and respond to them because it's useful to them. It's related to what they're seeking to change, what they already know they're seeking to change. The third thing is to allow them to say what is on and off the table, and this is really important, and I know some people might be a bit nervous about that. But the problem is that if you don't allow them to do that, it means that they feel they risk that you'll be getting engagement on things that they can't agree to. And it means then that it's destroying trust for them. It's another case of, not being transparent or being false, or it might help them, make things worse for them in terms of being seen as not listening. As the NZTA award case that we've heard about today showed, there was pretty much already a decision they were going to put a road in, but that didn't mean there weren't a lot of other decisions to be made in terms of where that road went, how it was done, where the busway went, where the bridges were built, all of those things. So even when something is most definitely on the table, and so there isn't, or off the table in terms of there isn't a decision still to be made about whether to build the road, there's still a lot of engagement, useful engagement to be done in terms of the detail of that. And so that's something that's really important to them. And they said in their experience, they need to be transparent about what is on or off the table to have legitimacy. Fourth thing is to ensure that it's like a two-way conversation between the public and the politician, so that the public listen a bit to the politician as well as to each other and to different people. And they basically said the more conversational and constructive engagement is, the better it is for them. They also said that informal public engagement was more useful than staged. And I know that some people in the workshop on Tuesday said that you need the stage to allow people to vent, but the politicians very much felt that doesn't help them. It doesn't give them usable inputs. If they're brought along to a town hall to be lynched, it really doesn't help them. That's a risk, and their advisors and gatekeepers won't want them to take that risk. Well, on the other hand, though, the more informal conversations, where it is this two-way dialogue, they said that's when people are reasonable and when you can really learn a lot. And because of that, you get constructive suggestions and comments, and then they're much more likely to adapt what they're doing to that than they are to staged critique. And then the other thing is to make sure you identify multiple ideas, not just one, do this or don't do that. Because if there's a range of options, then they have much more flexibility and they're much more likely to be able to take on board some of those proposals. And then lastly, give them a safe space to give feedback. And I know some people during these 2 days have talked about the importance of closing the loop and reporting back, but you need to involve the politicians in that and give them a space where they can say, well, yes, we can do that, or but no, we can't, but here's why, or here's how we might adapt it, or we might do it later on, and give them chance to explain. And that's something the media doesn't give them, for example. They don't tend to get, they get a soundbite, that's it. They don't get the time to explain, and so they can't convey and communicate that they actually have listened. And so if you can create that space for them and allow them to report back to the public on the results of engagement, then again, that's creating a much more safe space for them as politicians, as leaders. That means that it's a good thing for them to engage and not a risk. Okay, so that's my main points, and I look forward to some more comments during the Q&A.
Can you hear me okay? How's the energy level? You look beautiful from up here, can I just say? All right, and it's a total populist promise, but my promise is to keep it short. So I'm going to speak, I've got to do this little caveat at the front to say I'm not speaking on behalf of my employer, Queensland Government. I'm speaking on behalf of my experience as working as a practitioner. So I'm going to talk a little bit about experience in consulting world and also working with government and decision makers, but I just want to express that I'm not expressing the views on behalf of my employer, the Queensland Government. Check, good, all right, not that, awesome. All right, so as I said, I'll keep it pretty short. I'm just going to give half a dozen points. I'm going to follow on very, very closely from what Jennifer was talking about some of the key ways that we as practitioners can interact with decision makers. My experience is largely project and policy based, so I will add that caveat, but I think we can all probably draw something from it. So we all agree, basic premise of engagement, it's about decision making. It's about making better decisions, more informed decisions. So the overall view from me about what decision makers are looking for, you ready? Get your notepads ready. This is really important stuff. 2 key things they're looking for in terms of what we can do in terms of consultation practitioners and professionals. Number 1 is de-risking. The first thing they're looking for is de-risking. I'm going to explain what that means in a second. But the first thing they're looking for is de-risking. The second thing they're looking for is how do we create or enhance the opportunity. So number 1 is de-risking. The second thing is creating or enhancing that opportunity. So we talk about de-risking. we're not just talking about reputational risk. So that is part of the suite, that is part of the thing that we're looking at, but we're not just talking about reputational risk. So we're talking about de-risking is we're consulting to understand. So we're engaging or consulting to better understand. And that can be understanding a number of things. It can be understanding pain points. It can be understanding if we go ahead with this decision, what the impact will be. It can be understanding something as simple as what do we like or dislike, or what are the people impacted by it like or dislike. But what we're looking for is an understanding of risk. So that's the first thing our decision makers are looking for. Second thing they're looking for is how do we drive or enhance that opportunity? So if we use that information to make a decision, how do we make the most out of it? How do we get the best impact from it? Again, look from a policy point of view. Look at Queensland government, for example. This is a random example. If we look at something like a renewable energy policy and say that meant we look for providers to come into this space or come into Queensland and invest in renewable energy, who's that going to be? What's that going to look like? So if we decide to make that decision, we engage to better inform that decision and to enhance that opportunity. Primarily, that's the thing that our decision makers are looking for. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience and the things that work about how we better understand and also how we can have more informed conversations with decision makers about how consultation can play that role. So again, this is a little bit about what's worked for me. It's not necessarily going to work for everyone, but I'm happy to share, I guess, a framework or framing our position in a way that for me has resonated. So I'm only going to talk for another 15, 20, maybe 4 hours tops. You all right with that? Everyone's going, but God, just stop talking. We need to go to the bar. 5 minutes tops, promise. Then you can ask questions. All right, so the first guide for me is always be inquisitive. So my first guide is always be inquisitive, and that is ask questions to understand. There is no such thing as too many questions. There is no such thing as too many questions. We need to understand from a decision maker's point of view a couple of really key things. That desired outcome, what is it that they want to achieve out of this? This policy, this decision, this project, what is it that they want to achieve out of it? And make sure that we have an understanding of the language that they use. And also the flip side of that, what are the potential pain points? Let's get that on the table early. The objective for all this, we had a speaker earlier today, Alan. Is Alan still here? Alan came from WA. He spoke a bit about authenticity, and I really liked the way he framed it. Potentially a little bit controversial, but he said, if you want a good PR or a good snow job, hire a marketing company. Now, you probably noticed in my title, I have marketing in my title as well. I'm very clear to point out to people they're two very separate hats. But the idea behind that is how can you be authentic without a true understanding of what is it? What's at the nuts and bolts of it? So the first guide to authenticity is be inquisitive. Ask lots of questions. So after you've done that, it's about framing the conversation and checking back in. Do we have an agreed understanding of our intended outcome? So in terms of our decision makers and our practitioners, are we on the same page? And do we have a universal language of what that means and what that might look like? Then there's the articulation of that connection between consultation or engagement and that delivery. So once we understand what our intended delivery is, how is it that consultation can help us get there? So I kind of started to write this and there's a long list of themes or dot points to here, but I'll kind of keep it pretty simple. But the key things are, what are we aiming for? What decisions are we making? How are we involving stakeholders in that decision-making process? What data do we need? Am I going too fast for people to write stuff down? I do talk quickly. What data do we need and what are we going to do with it? That's the really important part. What data do we need? How is it going to intersect with decision-making? What's the type of data that we need? It was interesting to hear it talking before about planning. So work a lot in the planning space. So planners are fantastic, by the way, at understanding how engagement works. We have that interaction about what's the decision that you need to reach? What's the information that you need? How can we interact with you? Where are those decision-making points? Close the loop. I know that we have talked about a lot today, and I like the fact that Jennifer mentioned it as well. So close the loop and how we're going to do that. And last but not least, how are we going to measure it? What does success look like? How do we build those things in? And then last but not least is be authentic about the articulation of what we're actually asking people to contribute to, and importantly, why. What's the outcome for this? So what's the That really important part. People may not necessarily love the decision that you're making, but they need to understand why. They need to understand that driver. So final note for us as practitioners, I said this is my view of my world. I'm probably telling many of you how to suck eggs and you know this already, but I'm talking about from experience what works, what really resonates. We have to be clear. So us as practitioners, it's our role. We have to be clear. It's not about getting people to love a decision. It's about articulating their role in participating in the decision making and why. That's critically important. So let me leave you with this. Once upon a time, I had a wise manager who once said to me, Nathan, order tankers are flipping burgers and gherkins at McDonald's. He said, it's your role. It's up to us to be courageous. It's up to us to have the courage. And he said, we need to help our decision makers make informed decisions. That is our role. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now we're going to open it up to question time. We do have the. Do you want to just? You guys can pass the mic between you. So we've got the little boxy microphone-y thing that we'll throw to you. So I'll open it up. Has anybody got a question that they would like to ask? Yep. Just wait for the microphone. There you go.
Oh wow, it literally is a box.
Just talk into the black bit.
Okay. Jennifer, I know you just know what I'm going to say. You brought up 3 key points. The first one was involve. So I was just wondering if you had any, or if you could suggest any methods on how to involve, these higher level people, because often they're not accessible.
Yeah, I mean, is that working? Okay, all right then. Can't hear myself. Doesn't matter though, as long as you can hear me. In terms of involving, I mean, I think it's hard if you've been denied access. The only thing I can say is that the research shows that when politicians are interested in and do have a relationship, right from the beginning through to the end of the process, that's when it's effective. And so there's been instances where politicians themselves have said, right, we want public engagement on this issue, but then the people running the engagement have kept them in touch with things all the way along, invited them to events, gone and had not only done the official reports that we do, but they've also gone and had informal conversations, and also given them warning, for example, of what it might say, because some of the things that the public might say, or that the results of the engagement, the data might show, might be something that is, would cause a political crisis if the politician did it, so they need to be given warning, for example. And I know they did that with the New Zealand Tax Working Group under John Key, because one of the recommendations was to increase GST, and John Key had promised not to do that. So by giving him warning, it gave him chance to, and it was done informally, it gave him chance to prepare for it, and he ended up actually considering that and deciding to do it, and took a political risk to do it. And I think that continual relationship is really important. They have also involved them, and it might seem a bit more staged in this respect, but in terms of the opening event. So although I said the informal conversations are good, they've also involved with that, so that they're politicians in the room. But there are different ways of doing that. So one thing is you have them at the platform saying nice words about how important it is, and that's good. But the other thing that some people who ran the Australian Tax Working Group said they did is they got them sitting down at the table along with everybody else as well. So yes, they might have said a bit of posh stuff at the stadium, and that was good for the pictures, but they also got them just sitting down and listening just along with all the other participants. So I think there are a range of ways of getting them involved, but in terms of your situation, or the problem, if they don't want to be involved, then that's a lot harder, but I think you've still got to try. And I know some of you, like Mary, for example, may have some, if we can open it up, have got some other ideas, some other experiences in trying to do that.
Okay, have we got another question? Oh yeah, okay. I was going to ask one, but you can go first.
Yes, this is for David. I was just going to, I was going to ask the question about, you've got the strategy and you've also got an objective, which is the settlement strategy, and the objective, another objective is to recruit new members and retain existing members. my name's Michael Lucis. I'm representing Wildlife Queensland, and our lessons that we've learnt is if you actually succeed in whatever strategy you're trying to do, people will want to be part of that organisation. So, and we took 3 years to do the single plastic bag campaign, convinced all 89 members of the state government that it was a good idea, including Katter Party. Within 6 months, 2 other states have done it. And it was, even though members wanted to spend money on new national park campaigns, we said, what about this environment issue? So I'm just thinking that your settlement strategy is a very good idea, but can you see that if you push a bit more, there could be benefits in retaining and recruiting new members?
Absolutely. Members will be attracted, or potential members will be attracted to the organisation, and those in will be retained when there is success and when their values align with the values of the organisation, even if you're struggling to get that success. What we've also found is having a single issue which you have to maintain focus on might not always appeal to the broad church. They might often have different views on what that priority is. So you need to be constantly restating that that is the focus. And what we find is if you're true to those values, even though many individuals don't see it as their top priority, they will support you because of the value alignment to do it. The point about the recruitment and retention was sometimes we are actually going into the media space, into public comment, knowing it is not part of our one campaigns, but we are actually just want to be seen to be making comment because that is a member recruitment and retention tactic. So there's 2 things there. One is maintain the focus, it's tough, but keep the values true. And then just knowingly and deliberately sometimes go into the public sphere for retention and recruitment purposes.
Do I have any other questions? Yep, just down the front here.
Just a question about the registered professionals, the registered planners process. I just wondered how resource intensive that is as a process and what the cost is around that too, because if in some ways I like the idea of accredited practitioners, and I guess, and it also, if it's competency based and it's peer assessed, I think that's a really nice thing rather than participation or attendance based. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, it's been a long journey. There was previously another membership category called CPP, Certified Practicing Planners. It was only based on doing some courses and you're in. The market didn't like it. The international bodies, our cousins, internationally didn't accept it. We created Registered Planner with this competency assessment peer review. It took us 4 years to get to the starting point. It took 2 years just to define the competencies. That was an extensive consultation process right through the membership. And going into the market now, I'm picking up on some of Nathan's words, one of the pitches for it in the recruitment and procurement area is it de-risks for those people needing services, either staff or to procure planning services. So we're getting good traction in the market at the moment. We seem to be able to swim against the tide because everything's about deregulation, has been for a few years, but we're finding state governments are looking for the professional standards and competencies to de-risk their inappropriate influence in decision-making around land use. So we're actually running with a bit of momentum at the moment with the right product. The organisation has spent a lot of money doing it. The members, we charge $700 to go through the assessment process, in addition to their membership fees. Yes, there's a CPD requirement of a certain number of hours. We actually do monitor and audit that. Our first set of letters are going out within the next month or 2. That's going to be fun being the CEO, isn't it? And my mobile phone number's on the bottom of the email.
I think Marion's feeling your pain right now.
But
Yeah.
it has to be robust. It has to have the ongoing commitment to learning if it is going to be a sellable item in the market to de-risk those acquisitions.
So can I jump in with a question then? And this is probably something I'd be interested in each of your views on, given the different backgrounds. What is it that IAP2 could do to help influence decision makers? What could we be doing as an organisation to help our members influence those decision makers?
I first of all want to know why we didn't get the funky microphone. Where's that one? That's very cool. Look, again, I've been a member for a long time, and look, a little bit of bias here, but I think we're headed in the right direction. I think for me, it's certainly for young practitioners, it's around coming back to training and support. So it's about do the training, have a good understanding of where we're going, around the context of engagement around decision making and how it's involved, and an understanding that it's not just a nice to have. It's different from PR, it's different from communications and marketing. And I think that the more that we encourage that professional development, and through my grey hair and having been around for a while, I'm certainly seeing, and as a trainer, younger practitioners coming through with a really deep understanding of that. So gut feel, we're heading in the right direction. It's a journey. The more that we bring young practitioners on board, get them excited about it, get them understanding it, they're the next step. They're going to further advance the practice.
Jennifer?
Well, in terms of influencing the decision makers, then and what IAP2 can do with that, then I think they've got to, listen to, understand, respond to, and communicate with the decision makers. So one of the things we've discussed with various people during this week or these few days is that perhaps we need to train the decision makers in some way. Now, we can't require them to come to auditable training, obviously, but it is, we've got to think about ways, and I think this is something the IAP2A research working group can look at in terms of, is there other things we can do on behalf of the members to communicate the benefits of high quality public participation, because it's not just any old that works. And again, it's thinking about it from their perspective. It's understanding what the life is like for them, what are their goals, how can we help them reach their goals, instead of engagement being something they have to do because of regulation or they have to because they're being told, but instead trying to turn it around and say, this isn't actually a problem, this is actually going to be a help to you in what you're trying to do. But you really, to do that, you've got to think about it not in terms of just advocating passionately for why participation is great in the way that you know it, and for democracy and for the public, but it's actually why it's good for them. Sort of standard marketing, as that was Marion was saying earlier when we were having a discussion. So really kind of turning it around and thinking of it from their perspective. And that's sometimes quite hard to do when you know your stuff, you're passionate about it, but you've got to put it in their context and walk in their shoes and say, well, okay, what is it, with what I do, how does it help them? And then IAP2 needs to think about how to get that message out to them, whether it's communication, relationship building, or, as I say, training the decision makers in some kind of way.
I might take a slightly different tact. I think there's a golden age about to bloom for your profession. We've gone through the last 20 years where there has been great faith placed in corporate Australia and corporate entities and government. And over the last 2 years, we've seen the reality of that. Call it neoliberalism, you can, lots of tags you can call it, but they are losing the social licence to be taking the community with them. And the politicians are hearing it. The politicians understand now that that social licence is gone. And if they want to stay re-elected, and I suspect at times that's all they're interested in, but if they want to stand re-elected, they need to understand, and they do, I believe, understand that they must find ways of true professional consultation with the community at the right end of decision making and policy development. And like we go to the market and say, this is how you de-risk by having a professional planner, I think you are entering a golden period for you guys to do exactly the same thing.
Great. Maybe we will see engagement up at the beginning of the meetings with the safety shares at some point, which would be really exciting. You got a question, Amanda? You've got the box. Talk into the mic. It'll be turned on now. There you go.
Oh, it's on now. So my question is, if we were to shake it up in 2019 bearing in mind that engagement in IAP2 has been using same set of core values and approaches for quite some time. What is the thing that we should do to shake up the practice in 2019 such that we don't have to have the discussion around how we have greater impact with decision makers?
Start with you, you've got the microphone. I think I'm the least qualified on that one.
Okay. Well, there's one area which I don't see getting enough discussion amongst practitioners and academics, and that is what you do with the data or the input you get. And that partly relates to connecting with the decision makers, but it's also about how you plan your processes. And I know that you've got lots and lots of constraints, and there's budget issues, and partly, politicians and government to blame. But it just strikes me there's so much effort put into designing fantastic and really phenomenal processes to get at what the community think. And then it's like, but then what? What's done with it? And then the other thing is not just with that particular event, but I wish we could find a way of maintaining that data for future use. Because it might be you consult on something and an idea comes up, in 2018 that can't be acted on in 2019, but it might be acted on in 2025. And so I wish I've argued, and from my research, advocated for a permanent unit of some kind to maintain and archive and create the input and the data that we give. So it's not just for one-off purposes, but it's retained for the long term. So it would be not collecting, but curating the public input from the participation. I think you've got the methods sorted. And of course, there's always debate about different levels of quality, and there'll always be new innovations and wonderful things coming up. But it's still it's generally pretty high quality. That's sorted. So the emphasis would be on what you do with that data.
I'm just going to second that because I couldn't agree more. That's beautifully summed up. There's two parts to it. There's data and evaluation. So, again, I'm a data nerd by heart. I guess it's kind of changing the paradigm of what we look to do, but it's around how do we collate the data? What do we do with the data? Close that loop. Make more of a deal about closing the loop, which is the hardest thing to do, right? All of us who work in this gig in the room know this. It's hard to find the time. When you're in consultancy on project stuff, you're too busy thinking about the next one. It's like, oh my God, that's finished. I'm so tired. I haven't slept in God knows how long. Oh, no, I'm off to the next one. Because that's how it works. When you're in-house, as I've since discovered, that doesn't change a heck of a lot. So it's how do we prioritise that more? And it's also the evaluation piece. How do we collate that data in such a way that we can have meaningful conversations and say, here's how your contribution made a difference. Or if it didn't, why not?
And the left field idea for me to shake it up is the governance of data is the sleeper issue. If this organisation decided that was their cause célèbre to shake it up, I think you will attract enormous support because it is, as I said, I think it's the big sleeper issue on the governance of all this data that we're attracting and collating and collecting and making it available for the right users for the right use, not the vendors.
I can actually see everybody's brains ticking over with that about how we're going to do that and where does it fit with privacy legislation, but who could hold it and how would we access it? But exciting idea, really good. Okay, we've got another question here.
Perhaps more of a comment and a response to some of the things that have been raised. I want to connect a couple of things that this audience has heard both today but also in a couple of conferences ago. One is Kylie's presentation today about rebuilding trust, or what's happened with trust. And Kylie talked about that the P in political has been lost, the R in religious and faith has been lost as institutions. What's remaining is community. So what are we doing with that institution of community? How are we building the capacity of community to engage with government, to engage with each other, with all range of organisations? And I wouldn't want to say just to build the capacity. If the capacity is there, but is it acknowledged? And is it strengthened? Is it built upon? Is it actually shown as a leader of engagement practice at times when we sit in our organisations perhaps thinking that we're the leaders? So that's one comment I would make is what can we as an organisation actually do to build that capacity? at a number of levels and a number of corners. The other is Lukensmeyer. Carolyn Lukensmeyer at the conference in Perth spoke about the 7 pillars of building and strengthening democracy. And I think then about what are those pillars and what are we doing as an organisation to perhaps strengthen those. So that's about having places upon which we can meet and meet in a safe space. Having a robust media. What are the safe spaces for us to debate social issues now without it being overtaken by the politically correct so-called view? And, you know, we could go on about that, but I think that that there is a space for this organisation to look at its arm of advocacy, and it is, in a very powerful way, but linking it to some of that research and some of that commentary, which is very real, based on very good research and what we can all really connect to.
So I might throw the first part of that to maybe Jennifer. I'm just wondering if, just because you're looking scared, that's fine, it won't hurt, I promise, it won't hurt. I'm just wondering, in your research, have you focused at all on the community view of engagement and the capacity that they feel that they have or don't have? I see a lot of communities who sit and wait very patiently for engagement to come to them. I know there'll be a point where they'll be demanding it, but where do you see the communities at in terms of that capacity to engage and to act in that way?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think my research covered that. But the one idea that sprung to mind, if we're talking about, I really like the shake it up question because I think it's making us think outside the box, is that wouldn't it be nice if public engagement, and thinking about it in a dream way, you know, wouldn't it be nice if public engagement was something that was a part of our regular part of society, like voting is, like paying taxes is. I know that's more painful, but you know, when you talk about communities waiting to be engaged with, well, that's a real shame, and that's perhaps something that IAP2 could think about. Although we can't, you know, we run the world, you can't make everything change, but it would be really nice if it was a permanent part of our civic culture, like jury service, for example. And I think perhaps that's where, you know, the idea of a unit or institutionalisation of engagement or professionalisation of engagement, all of those ideas kind of come together in terms of moving us to the next step of public participation, where it's not an add-on or a side thing, but it becomes part of that. And it might respond to, you're talking about the media, and we haven't got the media space anymore because it just doesn't work. The public don't want to pay taxes for public media, they don't want to pay for their newspapers and TV directly, and so that has limited the media space. Maybe that debate and dialogue and informed communication that used to happen in the media, maybe public engagement is the new space that has to rise up to take, not the same space because it'd be different, but to actually think about that. Sorry, that was a bit vague and quite academic, but it's because I didn't have a complete answer to the question, so I did the usual thing of waffling. Anyway, over to you, because you're an IAP.
Just going to follow that with some of my waffle. Great question. I think I'll start with the framing that have been pleasantly surprised. So I only work in Queensland, but I would say that communities we're engaging with over the past 12 to 14 months that I've been there, pleasantly surprised at over time, capacity of communities to be involved in decision making and an understanding that our process, whilst not perfect, because it's never perfect, it is authentic and genuine. So current view, pleasantly surprised. And I kind of agree with Jennifer, there's a potential for us in this room and us in this field to take the space that media used to play in. It's kind of reverting back almost to pre-media type, right? So the communities are getting together. We have a role of playing the conduit between decision makers and communities. So I think if things like the core values help us drive that authenticity, and that's the thing that will keep us truthful and honest.
Excellent. Did you have a comment, David? Or?
One comment, and this will be a beautiful pivot play. You guys have to take this space. We have to normalise the consultation. The community will need to see it as a normal part of the process, because in planning, it's getting de-democratised. With the increasing impact of digital transformation, many of the decisions will actually happening by artificial intelligence. The community consultation has to start at the design end, That's where we need them involved. That's where they retain the character. That's where they have the influence. But you've got to normalise that, because if it doesn't happen then, we won't get great placemaking.
Now we're just about out of time. There is one more question, I believe.
Sure.
Sue, you've got the microphone.
I do. This is so weird, this thing. So my question's really for David, and this is not my experience with other planners, but I'd like to ask you how I could shake up my current planning colleagues to do more in consultation than go beyond their perception of discharging their statutory responsibility. So a lot of the issues we're dealing with are very sticky around communities. A lot of them would have a lot to say, but our planning teams from junior to senior want to basically send out a letter, tell people what's happening, and that's the end of it. And it's very frustrating. So yeah, your thoughts on perhaps why and how we might change that.
If I had that recipe, I'd be a rich man. But I think it's about looking at the role and the culture and what that workplace is actually like. Many planners, particularly the young ones, are actually not well equipped for dealing with the contested space in the community. But the demand and the workflow and sometimes the financial restrictions in some of these workplaces means they will push those young people out. And this happens particularly when you get out into regions where there might only be 1 or 2 planners. And they get pushed into roles that you would normally have as a senior planner who is used to dealing with contested views. A lot of the time consultation is seen as a tick in the box simply because of the work pressure of the statutory planner. But you've got to promise not to tell anyone else this. I'm really concerned for the future of statutory planners. I think the whole world of statutory planning is going to change over the next 5 years. It will change because people will be looking for much faster responses. They'll be looking to lodge things electronically, assessed electronically at that statutory end. So it will all move, all the profession and the consultation must move to the master planning, the strategic side. That's where the fun is anyway. That's where you get the coloured crayons. But I feel really sorry for the planners in that situation you're describing. It's a common situation, and it's it's brought about by a number of factors. And my only suggestion is they should lift their eyes. They should look to the horizon as well and think about their careers.
Can I just add to that? This is a shameless plug. DSD MIP Planning Toolkit.
So that's the Department of State Development.
Manufacturing, Infrastructure and
Planning, yeah.
Written by some clever people in this room. I can't talk to you about it while I'm on stage, but I can. So we can talk later, because part of. Yeah, but we can talk off stage about how we might make that happen.
Okay, and Jennifer, you just had a point?
I had a point that's, sorry, it's not related, but if this is going to be the last time, I just want to say, in the room, in the foyer, there's an ideas tree, and that's where we'd like you to put any ideas you have. So when we talked earlier about thinking outside the box and imagining what the future might be in terms of professionalisation, connection with decision-making, curating data, and so on, any big ideas that you've got, put them on there, because that's been set up by the IAP2A's research working group, which is all of about 8 days old, I think 9 days old maybe. And so we're very new, so we are seriously engaging because we haven't made any decisions about what to do at all because we've just started. Is there time? But no, seriously, because it just made me think the comments and questions that came up that it's really worth, if you've got any ideas for really thinking outside the box of what IAP2 might do and think about in the research space as well as the future direction space, then please add them there. There's already some really great ideas there, but any more you've got, just please jot it on your way out, okay? Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. I'd just like to say thank you to our speakers, to David, Jennifer and Nathan, if you could join with me in thanking them.